Xiaoxian, I would like to ask you, you have carried out many different activities in Shaanxi and have done numerous non-governmental projects. I would like to know more about how you first came to be engaged in these kinds of feminist activities.
This probably is related to my own experiences. I was one of the class of 1977 university students. That is to say, I was among the first class of students to take the college entrance examinations that were reinstated after the Cultural Revolution. So when we graduated and received job assignments, most of us went to, well, because at that time the government emphasized the four modernizations of its cadres. That is, to become more revolutionary, more knowledgeable, more youthful, more specialized. The first class of university students to graduate after the Cultural Revolution was all assigned to various party and government organizations. This was how I came to work at the Women's Federation.
So when did you begin to work at the Women's Federation?
It was in 1982, January of 1982.
The Shaanxi Women's Federation?
Yes, the Shaanxi Women's Federation. Since I was among the first group of college graduates in history to be directly assigned to the Shaanxi Women's Federation, the Women's Federation really regarded me highly. The officials there assigned me to an extremely important post, an administrative position in the office where I was responsible for drafting some work reports and speeches for officials. I therefore had the opportunity to see various counties' Women's Federation documents like investigations, study reports, and so on. In 1982, the Chinese countryside responsibility system had just started. The entire society was undergoing enormous changes. The Cultural Revolution had lasted for 10 years, and the countryside had many new issues to deal with. For instance, there were the issue of the buying and selling of women in marriage. At the very beginning, when it happened, women would refuse to marry, and some would run away, and so on. So I came across many incidences like this. As for my personal experience, well, during the Cultural Revolution, people in my generation who have experienced these 10 years have too much of a sense of responsibility to society. Originally, when I entered university, I wanted to do research in the social sciences. I hoped to advance the process of the democratization of Chinese society or to make contributions towards political reform. After I went to the Women's Federation, my dream of doing research was changed. After I read a massive amount of documents that dealt with real-world problems, I felt, because I still wanted to do research, I chose to, since sociological studies were restarted in China at the time, I wanted to study marriage and family, to do research on women's issues from the view of a sociologist. This was the starting point. During this process, there were several very important opportunities. One was in 1984 when I went to the Chinese Women's Cadre Managerial Institute.
Oh, the Women's Cadre Managerial Institute.
The Chinese Women's Cadre Managerial Institute used to be called the Chinese Women's School for Women Cadres. At that time, they were preparing to change to a college for professional training, but they lacked research materials. Therefore, they selected some people from each province to compile teaching materials. So I had the chance to, because I was interested in women's research, I took the initiative to apply to participate in this group that would compile teaching materials. In 1984, I stayed in Beijing for a semester, from March to July. This semester marked my transition. In the beginning, when I entered the Women's Federation, I was mainly interested in marriage and family issues, maybe because at the time the new marriage law had just been promulgated and many new issues regarding marriage emerged. So these 6 months of study marked a transition for me. I had the opportunity to look at some of the research on Chinese women from the 1930s, like the works of Zhang Jian.
Right.
Shen Chunhui and also Liu Wang Liming. I read all their books.
Right. These are part of the Women's Federation's archive of materials at the Chinese Women's Cadre Managerial Institute.
We had to make a compilation of teaching materials for college-level training. There was nothing already in existence, so we got together all the historical materials and looked at them. This included Liu Qiong, things she wrote from the 1930s and 40s and in the 1950s.
Did you also look at works written by Liu Wang Liming?
Yes, we also looked at Liu Wang Liming. After reading these materials, I felt that the 1980s Chinese women's research did not surpass that of the 1930s. At the time, I also read Bebel's Women in Socialism.
It was also available to you?
Yes, we read a lot of sources. The result of my brief study of the Chinese women's research from the first half of the 20th century was that it stimulated my interest in women's research. I began thinking, why are so many years of the women's liberation movement? Before we came to read these materials, generally speaking, we used to adopt a simplistic Marxist view on women and thought that the inequality between men and women was a kind of class issue, right?
Right.
We learned it from Engels' Origin. Then we believed that the cause of inequality was that housework was not socialized because production had not reached a high level. This was how we theorized this issue. When the 1980s arrived, these theories were all insufficient to explain the complex issues that we faced at the time. It stimulated my interest to again think about these issues. This was how I came to have an interest in researching women's issues.
Then what did you do after you studied in 1984?
After I came back from my studies in 1984, it was interesting. Those who are familiar with the development of China during the reform period, during those historical 20 years, know that around 1984 the reforms in the Chinese economy began to expand from the rural areas to the cities. Along with the start of reforms in urban areas, new issues concerning women appeared. The enterprises that were recruiting workers did not want women. Female college graduates could not find jobs. In this kind of social environment, the All China Women's Federation also started to consider women's research. In December of 1984, the All China Women's Federation held the first theory seminar. The director of my office participated in that seminar. After she came back, she gave me the complete set of articles. I was extremely happy because the Women's Federation was beginning to pay attention to these issues. I discussed with my boss whether Shaanxi province could also hold this kind of seminar. At that time, the Women's Federation was undergoing organizational reform, and the All China Women's Federation had established a research institute. As a result, various provincial women's federations followed suit. In January of 1985, the Provincial Women's Federation also implemented organizational reform and established a research unit. I was then appointed to be the assistant director of the research unit.
Who was the director?
The director was rather old. She probably thought, first of all, I was interested in researching women's issues. I probably never told you this. Prior to this, I still wanted to carry out research even after I went to the Women's Federation. So I used the opportunities during my trips to the countryside to do some investigations and to write something. Therefore, in 1994, I attended the first session of the seminar on family issues that the journal Family convened. They saw that I was interested in the research and had already published an article. So when they established the research unit, I then became the assistant director for that unit.
This was your first official title, right?
Yes, my first official title. After I assumed this position, the first matter that I did was to talk with my boss about whether or not we could convene a women's theory
seminar?
Yes, a seminar, Reform and Women's Seminar. I also want to establish a women's theory research group. After the Cultural Revolution, the Chinese social sciences wanted to correct past mistakes and foster prosperity in research. At that time, I guess that you were also in China?
Yes.
New disciplines established all kinds of academic associations. In the 1980s, when we entered the Women's Federation, cadres were relatively old. Most cadres there were senior in age. There were very few young people. The knowledge structure was relatively homogeneous. Also, there were very few people who had gone to college. Therefore, women's research could not be established with only the personnel from the Provincial Women's Federation cadres. We had to look outside. So we wanted to create such an association. My boss initially agreed. We still had not started to officially make arrangements or call for research papers when I noticed that Nankai University would offer a methodology training class in the field of sociology. I wanted to go. After all, my training was in history, and studying sociology on my own would not have been the best way for me to learn. It was better for me to have some training in the field. So, I went to talk to our leading official. She was very smart. Also, her own daughter wanted to participate in a similar training in literature, but her boss would not let her go. Her daughter was very upset. Maybe because of this experience, my boss probably felt that a leading official had to be open-minded and supportive, so she agreed to let me go. For 6 months, I took the training at Nankai University. It was very good. I came to know many good scholars from overseas, including sociologists. At that time, They lectured about theories of sociology. There was one whose name was Tsai Wanhui, a Chinese American. She went from Taiwan to study sociology in the U.S. There was another who taught research methodology whose name was Lin Nan. He was also a Chinese American. Scholars like Fei Xiaotong also all came to give lectures in our class.
Oh, really? This was in 1985?
Yes, 1985.
And you took this training for half a year?
Yes, half a year. A very good study in methodology. Soon after I returned to my work, I began to make preparations for the Research Association. During this time, I came to know Li Xiaojiang. In 1984, I already read Li Xiaojiang's article in Wei Dingao.
Where was it published?
Wei Dingao.
Oh, Wei Dingao is a publication.
Wei Dingao is an internal publication with restricted circulation. In the 1980s, the people who paid attention to the social sciences liked this publication. The ideas in this publication were slightly ahead of its time. Some things that were not considered suitable to be openly published were first seen here. Li Xiaojiang's article published there was the best written one that I have seen in the area on women's research.
What was the topic of the article?
Now I have forgotten. I think the article was regarding Marxism.
Was it about Marxist women's liberation theory?
Oh, right, I think it was. In the 80s, she published her earliest two articles. One was published in Marxist Research, and the other was published in Wei Dingao. At the time, I went to Chinese Women's Institute.
The Women's Cadre Managerial Institute.
When I went there to study, I brought the issue of Wei Dingao. At that time, Luo Jing did not agree with Li Xiaojiang's article. But when I came back and was making arrangements for our seminar, I went to ask Li Xiaojiang to participate, so I wrote a letter to her. In this letter, I talked highly about her article and told her that we wanted to hold such a seminar in Shaanxi and invited her to participate. Then, because of my study at Nankai University, the seminar was postponed. I did not start preparing for it right away. To my surprise, she invited me to attend her summer seminar in 1985. I went to that seminar as soon as I returned from Nankai University. At that seminar, I met Du Fangqin and a group of people from Shanghai.
This was in 1985, right?
Yes, July of 1985. At that seminar, I met a group of people who were all really enthusiastic about research on Chinese women. Everyone was really excited and we talked about our ideas. Then after I returned from the seminar in 1986, our own Reform in Women's Issues seminar was held.
Did people from the whole country come to participate in this seminar?
Yes, from the whole country. At that time, this seminar was one of the most influential conferences throughout the country in the 80s. Because of the seminar, a lot of people went through a transition. For example, the inspiration for Tan Shen's feminist thought started from there. During the time of this seminar, she was staying with Li Xiaojiang.
This was in 1986.
Yes, 1986.
What month was this?
June. I remember it was June 8th. Oh, June 8th, the seminar was held.
The seminar was called the Reform and Women's Seminar.
Yes, the Reform and Women's Seminar. Wang Jinling went, and so did Liu Dalin. Liu Ying, a sociologist, also went. Liang Jun was also there.
Altogether, how many people attended?
Altogether, there were more than 60 people.
More than 60 people. How did you send out invitations?
I put out a widespread call for papers inside the province. Those from outside the province heard about it and asked to come. Within the province, we called for papers. If a paper was selected, then we invited the author to come. Also, we specially invited several people. For example, we invited Li Xiaojiang, Liu Dalin, and Deng Weizhi. We also invited Liu Ying. Together, there were 4 of them. We invited them because we felt that Shaanxi's research is not very strong. We just came to know each other. The seminar had 2 keynote speeches in the morning. They each lectured for a half an hour. Then their paper was read out, and there was a small group discussion in order to... At that time, I did not know this was called keynote speeches. I just hoped that these would raise the level of our seminar. But the effect was surprisingly good. There were a couple of reasons for our success. Li Xiaojiang lectured first. Not only was there good feedback from researchers, but even our newly appointed Women's Federation chairwoman thought it was very good. Our new chairwoman came from the legal field. She did not have much experience in the Women's Federation. Suddenly, she felt enlightened and knew how she should start her work here and what she should work on. This seminar impacted the Women's Federation. Oh, Tongxin came too.
Tongxin came too?
She came as a student in sociology. There were also some people from other women's federations like Hebei, Jilin in Shanghai, from Huangshan, Shanghai, the Shanghai Association of Research on Women. Their Secretary General came as well. They talked about how they would organize their conferences better when they returned. In addition, the All China Women's Federation also had representatives there. This was really a good seminar, very good. It felt like a mobilization meeting. During that seminar, we established a research association called the Shaanxi Research Association for Women and Family. Why do we choose this name? Because in 1982, the All China Women's Federation already had a Chinese Research Association for Marriage and Family. It also had groups on the provincial level. In addition, the All China Women's Federation was in the process of establishing a research institution for women's theories. As you may well know, in 1984, when we gathered in Beijing to compile teaching materials, there were a lot of debates about what term we should use to call the field. We could use 妇女学 or 妇女理论 or 妇女研究 to refer to women's studies. The All China Women's Federation used 妇女理论, so that we thought we could have a name that would correspond with the two research units of the All China Women's Federation. It was always the same group of people that were enthusiastic about this kind of work.
Which two units are you referring to?
The first is the Chinese Research Association for Marriage and Family. The other one is what the All China Women's Federation was preparing to establish, a research institute for theories on women. In October of 1986, the All China Women's Federation held for the second time a seminar on theories. They had a preparatory group to make arrangements for the research institute. At that time, I was a member of this preparatory group. I remember Zhu Chuzhu was there, and there was also a man, a very active male member. I can't remember his name now. 3 of us were from the outside. There were also some officials from the All China Women's Federation. So we created this preparatory group for the purpose of establishing this research institute. But it took many years since 1986 for them to carry out the project. It was actually established after Liu Bohong and some others took over. The preparatory group has not carried out much work since 1989. Well, this is why we had such a long name for our association. At that time, the Research Association, when it was established, we realized that in the mid-80s there were a great deal of issues concerning women. A lot of real-life problems had emerged. At the time, there was a lot of interest among us as to how to study these issues, how to find the causes so that countermeasures could be made and we could influence government decision-making. We hoped that through policy intervention we could solve these problems. For example, I remember in the 80s I investigated the emigration of women from Shaanxi province. It was actually research on the kidnapping and selling of women. We also studied the conditions of working women's dual roles and burdens and the impacts of the implementation of the responsibility system on rural women. We did this kind of research in the 80s, but the problem we encountered at that time was, along with the many internal and organizational reforms in the government, the Women's Federation as a mass organization became independent. Before then, its offices and budget management were within the provincial government. Thus, it had difficulties trying to raise its own funds. Around 1986, the Shaanxi Province Women's Federation had established several organizations like us. There was the Association of Women Intellectuals, Association of Women Journalists, the Research Association for Family and Education, and us. Around the year 1986, our Provincial Women's Federation established 4 organizations.
The Provincial Women's Federation organized all these groups?
Yes, different departments of the Provincial Women's Federation were involved in organizing these groups. Because the Provincial Women's Federation's funds were limited, in 1987, there was a stipulation that money from the Provincial Women's Federation could not be used for these affiliated organizations. These groups had to be self-funded. At that time, our funds were extremely limited. There was no funding for research projects. We held training classes and lectures in order to raise a little money for our activities. The Research Association went through this process from 1986 to around 1993. Because we did not have any money, our self-positioning was to become a platform where members could find some opportunities for exchange. In 1989, we held a women's salon. In March, I think. We had 2 meetings. The themes were, at the time, the 70th anniversary of the May 4th movement was approaching. So one theme was Chinese women's liberation and the May 4th movement. We wanted to discuss the relationship between the May 4th movement and Chinese women's liberation. Then the second topic of discussion was sex and the commodity culture. We had this topic because we felt the impacts of commoditization.
Oh, sex and community culture.
Right, because at that time, commoditization created new... Take, for example, what happened in Tainan at the time. In order to create an environment for reform and opening, they wanted to sacrifice a generation of women. We wanted to carry on a discussion on this issue and to put forth some of our own views. But we met once in March and once in April, and then...
June 4th.
I was called a liberal because of this salon.
Oh, this salon became a problem for you.
It was an example of liberalization. Therefore, in 1989 and 1990, I underwent political examination.
Within the Women's Federation system?
Right. An investigation team came from outside the province.
Did they come especially because of you?
There were 2 or 3 of us. I was one of them. Later, in the beginning of my career as an official at the Women's Federation, looked pretty good. In 1986, our seminar was very successful. Something that was a side effect of this was that my boss suddenly recognized my administrative abilities. After I came back in October of 1986, I was called to be the director.
So you worked at the director of the Provincial Women's Federation office?
Yes, yes.
At the time, you were also holding the position of research director?
No, not at the same time. She had hoped that I could go to work in the office, but I said I did not want to do this. I liked doing research. The conditions that she gave me were very generous. I could bring my research to the office, I could bring work related to the Research Association to the office, and I could even bring my reference materials to the office.
Really?
Yes, the conditions were good because they wanted me to work there. Perhaps, possibly, this was because she thought I could write well and because the office director was supposed to produce a lot of documents. Eventually, I was not good at it. The director should know how to coordinate, but I was not good at coordinating, so I was not a good office director. In 1989, when organizational reforms took place, I returned to the research unit again. At that time, I was still considered one of the few rather competent young cadres at the Provincial Women's Federation. I could soon enter into the reserves of the Provincial Party Committee Organization Department. But the 1989 political examinations ended my official political career. Not only did my political career end, as for our research association, we were not allowed to change sessions or carry out any activities.
So the research association could not carry out any activities?
No, therefore, after 1989, the research association was rather quiet. We only did a few activities.
But at the time, you were still the assistant director of the research unit?
In 1989, I returned to the unit as the research director.
Director?
We were not allowed to proceed with the research association. When we did, what did we do during the period? I gathered 40 years of statistics of Chinese women. This information was from 1949 to 1989 and was accomplished with several young people.
Were these national statistics?
Yes, national statistics. In name, this project was jointly conducted with the All China Women's Federation Research Institute with Tao Chunfang. But actually, I led our own people and accomplished this work. It made up for the previous lack of work in this area. Afterwards, we made a picture album, 40 Years of Shaanxi Women. In this way, I should say that I returned to the field of history briefly and wrote something. This should be regarded as the first stage of my research. My interest in women's research was actually based on 2 points. One was a realistic need for this type of research. Reality continually put forth issues and problems. Dealing with these kinds of issues, our generation had a sense of social responsibility. Moreover, this interest in women's issues has had something to do with my experiences when I was growing up. I am our family's eldest daughter. My father is the only son in his family, and my mother is the only daughter in hers. Although, at home, I was often spoiled, my mother had to work, so when I was 3 years old and my parents sent me to their hometown so that my paternal grandmother could take care of me. My paternal grandmother also really loved and doted on me. However, because this was the Guangzhou countryside, she would always say to others, "My son does not have any children." At that time, I was almost old enough to attend elementary school. Hearing my grandmother say this kind of thing would make me feel a bit strange. In my little mind, I was wondering, why weren't girls considered children? In our family, there was not only me, I also had 2 younger sisters. So altogether, there were 3 daughters.
Oh, 3 daughters.
She always said, "My son does not have any children." Therefore, since I was a kid, I became quite sensitive to gender, but I also grew up with a strong desire to excel. That is to say that I felt that I needed to outperform boys. I wanted to be stronger than boys. I didn't like it that my grandmother was saying that kind of thing, as if girls were not children. From elementary school through university, I did rather well in school. I always did well. When I was ready to graduate from middle school and attend high school, I had a small problem because of my father's history. I could not attend a key middle school, and instead they went to the Provincial Girls' High School because my test grades were always very good. My middle school was a key school, and the Xi'an Middle School. It was very good. From a co-ed to girls' school, I did not like it. I think girls' schools at the time were rather tedious. Education was very rigid. Did you know that during the Cultural Revolution, during the later period of the Cultural Revolution, I was working on educational reform? I chose an interesting topic, researching the history of girls' schools and exploring how, in the future, we could change the learning environment at girls' schools.
So, the model for teaching?
Yes, therefore perhaps subconsciously, my brain paid attention to women's issues. So after I came to the Women's Federation, I unconsciously paid special attention to social issues and wanted to do something about this situation.
Then what university did you graduate from?
Northwest University.
You graduated from Northwest University History Department.
Right.
Then you were assigned to the Women's Federation. Did you object to this assignment in your mind?
At that time, I did not want to go to the Women's Federation. So why did I go to the Women's Federation? This is an interesting story. Initially, another girl from our class was assigned to the Women's Federation. The recruitment official was very experienced. As soon as she met this girl, she said they did not want her. She asked if there was a female student in the class who was already married. I was the only female in our class who was already married. This person was my father's old colleague, and her younger sister and I went to the same high school. I was a good student in my high school and I had a little bit of fame. She probably had heard of me, so as soon as she saw me, she wanted me to come there. My teacher had a talk with me. I was told that if I didn't go to the Women's Federation, we would lose a quota in Xi'an. One of my classmates had to be assigned to somewhere outside of Xi'an, so I should help keep the quota. She also said that I could work on the history of the women's movement. The Women's Federation had an office that worked on the history of the women's movement. So I said, since I would not be able to teach at a university, going to work on the history of the women's movement was also a very good opportunity.
But you really wanted to be assigned to university.
Right, so I thought working on the history of the women's movement at the Women's Federation was good, since I could not enter a university. Just after I arrived and reported to the Women's Federation, they held a big commendation meeting. At that time, I told them I needed to go to Xianyang, because my original work unit was in Xianyang, but the paperwork had not gone through. So my boss asked me to do an interview with someone who had an exemplary achievement during my achievement to Xianyang. I agreed. I had to go there anyway. When I returned from my trip and wrote up the material for them, they saw that my writings were very good. They insisted that I stay in the office instead of going to the research unit. They wanted me to return in the main office. So there was this episode. Actually, this turned out very good. I came to know a lot of things that were going on in society. For example, today we read about women fleeing from marriage, and today we would have to deal with a group of women who collectively committed suicide. There was also the traffic of women. So I got to see many of the problems that you would not be able to see in the media.
You learned about these things through your research work?
Through investigations and through internal governmental news dispatches. I was able to look at all of the All China Women's Federation internal news dispatches. These had a great impact on me and made me feel, well, personally, I did not have much exceptional experiences of men and women's inequality, but I did have two. The first was the attitude of my paternal grandmother since I was very young. The second one was when I was in the job market. I got married in the countryside. When recruitment started in Qianxian County, I was considered exceptional in our study of Mao Zedong's work. I was well known in the county and the province. At the same time, I was very good at sports. I was the captain of the county women's basketball team. In order to keep talented athletes in the county, they assigned me to work at a food supplier company in the county. Prior to the time when massive recruitments took place, I already had been there for 6 months. I usually participated in practices and games. I had a little bit of fame in the county. When the recruitment began, I did not want to work at the food supplier company anymore. I wanted to leave. When the county office for sent down youth recommended me to the Weihe power plant, they did not want me because they learned that I was married. They very firmly rejected me. Since I was fairly popular in the county office told them, if you all do not want Gao Xiaoxian, then you will lose the quota for 30 new workers. The result was that they continued to reject the recommendation for more than 20 days.
Because of this?
Yes, because of just me. They struggled against the county office for 20 days. In the end, because the time to recruit workers was almost over, they were afraid their recruitment would...
that they would not be able to recruit?
Yes, that they would waste their quota, so they eventually accepted me. Look how unreasonable these people were. Then they went to the Qianxian County to pick up the new workers.
From the countryside?
Yes, they only let me return to Xi'an. They let me go by myself there to report to the job.
Just because you were a married woman?
Because I was married, they feared I would be a bad influence in my new job. Oh my gosh! In my life, I had never come across such an awkward manner. I always strove to excel. I was always the student's leader, even when I was playing basketball. My self-respect was really injured. It was only because I was married, but there were also some men who were also already married. They didn't have any problems. In these two instances, I really felt gender discrimination. But I was still not very struck by this kind of phenomena. After I went to the Women's Federation and saw those things, only then did I really realize that China was still a country where men and women's equality had not been realized. Only then did I feel that I had a responsibility and a duty to promote men and women's equality. But at that time, I had not come to know many Western theoretical works. In college, I studied history and was interested in the history of the international labor movement. At the time, my graduation thesis was about, you might find this funny, I wrote about the thoughts of Bernstein and Kant.
Oh, a philosophical topic.
Because I thought paying attention to, at that time, I thought about why we live in this world. I felt a lot of Chinese like talking about Hegel. I felt sometimes people would use all means to achieve their purposes. At that time, I was somewhat interested in Kant. So this experience gave me some training in the history of philosophy. When I was doing research on women in the early 80s, I was still using Marxist frameworks. I liked the two-production theory and was interested in Marx's theory on alienation. Therefore, I used Engel's two kinds of production theory to study the Chinese...
gender inequality in China?
Yes, the reason why men and women are not equal was understood as the society's failure to recognize the production of human beings. So I was among the first in China who suggested reproductive funds. This should be regarded as the first stage of my work. Then I think as for me...
他也训练了我一些在那个对思想史的一些功底吧啊。那么我当时在做妇女研究的那个80年代初期的话呢，我还是在马克思主义体系中间去做事。我喜欢那种两种生产理论，我也对那个异化理论比较感兴趣，所以我在那个 X 起源那种两种生产中间来看中国当时的这个男女不平等，把它看作是因为人的再生产不被社会承认，所以我也是国内最早提出来的生育价值统筹的那批学者，知道吗？这是应该看的第一个阶段了。那么我觉得呢，对我来说
，when did you undergo this transition?
As for my transition, if you could say that I had a little bit of a theoretical breakthrough during that period of time, this was because in 1986, I don't remember her name. She was at the Jiaotong University. Her name was
Zhu Chuzhu.
Zhu Chuzhu held a training class in the Jiaotong University. She invited that American. What was her name? I visited her once. You know her, that population scholar.
Oh, Susan Greenhalgh, wasn't it?
Yes, that was her.
Oh, so you met her in 1986?
Yes, Zhu Chuzhu also participated in their seminar on reform and women. Our seminar. She invited that...
Susan?
Susan held a Women in Development seminar here. This was inspirational in my theoretical development. Then, it helped us rethink what is women's status. We have to differentiate women's conditions and women's status. Because if we don't make this differentiation, we feel that in reforms... At that time, I came across a lot of Western scholars who asked me, has Chinese women's status decreased? I questioned why they asked this question and whether it was a good way to frame the question. They also think that we are not friendly or have political ambitions. When we differentiate these two concepts, the effects are much better. We can use it to influence policies concerning women as a new framework. For example, we started to look at the control of resources, right? We have had a different perspective, but at the time it was only a broadening of a way of thinking at the time. We also began to know, for example, what impacts the social system in the former Soviet Union had on women. It was a double-edged sword. She talked about frameworks. First she introduced what is development. Then she introduced dependence theory and world system theory. Then she spoke about the development of capitalism on women and socialism on women. This really broadened my way of thinking. These were some of the Western ideas that I came into contact with in the 80s. In fact, the transition in my research was related to the conference in Tianjin in 1993. The second stage of my transition was, actually it was at this conference that I came to know the concept of gender for the first time, which is really a great analytical tool. During the same time, I met Tan Jingchang. I was right in the process of drafting the principles on how to implement women's law in Shaanxi province. I thought this was a good opportunity. We should promote this kind of legislation. Now we have an opportunity to promote a law. How could we do the job better? But I did not have a legal background, so I consulted her. She said that I should hold a training class or do a project. Only then did I come to know what exactly it means when you say project. She also told me that I could apply to the Ford Foundation. So I said that that would be good. Later I did apply to the Ford Foundation.
Prior to this time, you had never applied for external international funding. You had gotten all of your funding for your activities from the Women's Federation.
Yes, all of the funding came from the Women's Federation. In 1992, I applied for a small project that was
a reproductive health project.
Yes, a reproductive health project. This was a smaller project that I applied for, which fell under the All China Women's Federation Big Project. This project was rather small. I only received 10,000 yen to carry it out. However, for me, this was a very good training. During this project, I came to know this was a qualitative research. My advisor had trained me in the qualitative research method and also feminist research approach.
Oh, who trained you?
Hu Youhui from Taiwan trained me in feminist research methodology. Zhu Mingruo from Australia trained me in qualitative methods.
So when you carried out that project in 1992, they offered training?
Right.
This was training for the project personnel?
Yes, they wanted to train the project personnel. The Women's Federation called for applications. We had to compete. Because I have a background in social sciences and I received training in Nankai, I stood out among applicants within the Women's Federation system.
So you were selected?
Not only was I selected, moreover, I really impressed Zhu Mingruo. Later, in 1994, no, it was 1993, when Bai Mei asked her to train some people for the Women's Federation and supported 3 officials to study abroad. Zhu Mingruo insisted that I go because she thought I was...
At that time, Zhu Mingruo was invited by the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation invited her?
The Ford Foundation assigned her as an advisor for us. Then they sent us out. The people in the Women's Federation system did not know foreign languages, so because she was a person of Chinese descent, therefore, foreign language would not become an issue. She invited us to go to Griffith.
In Australia?
Yes, Australia. I stayed at Griffith University for 6 months. That half of a year was also very good. We delved deeper and deeper into our project and discussed it in great detail. We did numerous revisions and a lot of research very carefully. That was really a good training in the qualitative method of research. It was then that I began to know... Well, while in 1985 at Nankai, I had quantitative methods training. Now in 1994 in Australia, I had qualitative methods training. I think using qualitative methods is more suitable for feminist research. At that time, I felt that I could not make a breakthrough if I would only use quantitative methods. I could not rely only on quantitative methods anymore. At this point, I was not familiar with the issue of reproductive health, but I saw that we had to learn to use qualitative methods of research in this training, and I thought it would open up a new space for my work. So I applied and participated. I was fortunate to come across such a great opportunity.
So this was in 1992 when you first came to know feminist qualitative research methods.
This allowed me to listen attentively to women's voices and take women as the focal point. I started to learn about all of these concepts. We also began to know that researchers must have equal dialogues. We also must be aware of our privileges as researchers.
Powerful position.
Yes, we began to learn about such concepts such as power relations. In 1993, I attended this class, and I started to carry out a project for the first time.
Worked together with Tan Jingchang.
She suggested I hold a training class for the drafters of legal principles for implementing the women's law. So we asked Zhang Jian to invite some people in the country who practice law to help us with the training. 26 provinces and municipalities were involved in drafting such kind of legal principles for their own provinces. But in each province, it was the People's Congress and the Women's Federation working on this. They all lacked a background for this kind of work, so I wanted to hold a class for the whole county. At that time, I had just come back from Manila. I remembered it was in November. I think it was the 20th or so.
This was in 1993?
Yes, it was November of 1993. I came back from Manila. The time schedule was extremely tight, so I persuaded the Ford Foundation processed their paperwork very quickly. They told us they could not wait for the materials to be mailed. We could first fax the material to them and start the project as soon as the project was approved. However, the All China Women's Federation would not allow us to do this.
So what did you do?
Then I had a discussion with the Women's Federation leaders. We decided that we could not hold the training for the whole country, but we would hold one for the western part of the country.
Do you mean only Shaanxi province?
No, the western part of the country, 10 provinces in all. The Women's Federation did not allow us, so we held the training under the auspices of the Research Association. We drew the support of the People's Congress Legislation Committee. The People's Congress is the legislative body. And moreover, because our president was a member of the People's Congress Legislation Committee.
The Shaanxi Province Women's Federation president was a member?
Yes, so because of this, it was rather easy for us to hold the training.
This was the first activity that you held after June 4th?
This activity made me feel that the Research Association had a much bigger space to act in than it did the Women's Federation. This is one of the ideas. I think we could utilize it. In addition, in 1994, I went to Australia and saw many activities that overseas women's non-governmental organizations were involved in. This allowed me to once again re-examine myself. What is the purpose of doing women's research? The feminist research methodology says that feminism does not purport to be objective. Feminism acknowledges that it has a purpose for research, which is to promote men and women's equality, right? I think in terms of promoting gender equality in China, during my investigation for drafting our provincial legal principles for implementing the women's law, I realized that creating legislature is only one aspect. I saw that in reality, even when we had the law, many women still could not depend on the law in order to protect their rights. Disadvantaged groups need support, services, and help. I realized that only doing academic studies is not enough. In addition, research funding is a problem as well. This prevents us from organizing large-scale research projects. One advantage of Shaanxi province is that here are many institutions of higher learning. If we could begin to organize these women intellectuals and use their knowledge to provide services for disadvantaged groups, this would be a very good path for us. This could enhance the bonding among people within the Research Association and make it more cohesive. So when I came back from Australia in 1994, I turned in my second project proposal to the Ford Foundation. I wanted to establish a Women's Law Research and Service Center. At that time, the Ford Foundation wanted to support projects related to women's law in Beijing, and they did not have enough money to support us. Afterwards, I stumbled upon an opportunity. I knew of the American Global Fund for Women, so I applied there. They agreed and provided me with $8,000, which eventually funded the Women's Hotline at the beginning of our project.
So your personnel were the same that participated in the Research Association?
By that time, the Research Association had already changed a lot. Think about it. 10 years had already passed. We started in 1986, and this was already 1996. Moreover, after 1989, a lot of the core members from the Research Association had already gone to the South.
Oh, they left?
Yes, most of the core members were not there anymore. Very few core members remained, and even they were also... So we looked to recruit publicly in society. We were so surprised that more than 200 people applied. Then the candidates went through the interview process, which includes psychological testing. At that time, I was in the United States. In 1996, I was at your...
You were in Santa Cruz?
Yes, I was in Santa Cruz. The assistant director of the Research Association was handling this matter. We had so many people who were interested. There was a problem. Operating women's hotline requires... I remember when I was visiting you and others reminded me that a hotline also involves the issue of discursive power. The kind of discourse that used for hotline counseling is a very important question. Later, working there as a director, I discovered this was a very prominent issue. I thought we had to do something about this and began to look for funding again. The Asia Foundation contacted me and said they had some funds for projects on women. So I started another project to train consultants for the hotline so that they could cultivate gender sensitivity. Starting from the hotline, as an NGO, this organization started to gradually provide meaningful services. In 1996, there was the hotline. In 1998, the Legal Help Center was established. In 1999, a small gender training group was established. In 2001, the Domestic Abuse and Prevention Special Counseling Line was established. At the same time, there was also work on development in the countryside. I had been researching rural women for a long time. At that time, some foundations had asked me to work on some rural development projects. I actually felt that in the past I often went to the countryside to do research, but when I finished my investigation and left, I always felt sorry that I was there merely for research purposes. Now this kind of rural development project would definitely benefit the countryside. Of course, I was willing to participate. Therefore, we began to do rural development projects. This is how our organization developed. We started our first project in 1993, and by 1999 we had established a legal center. We always We were concentrating on projects that would provide direct services for women. At this time, we still did not understand how to operate an NGO. The Research Association did not change sessions, nor did we have elections. I was pretty much operating the organization myself as a Secretary General. I used my brand name to apply for my projects. But as the number of projects continued to grow, the distribution of available resources within the organization became less even. For instance, the hotline was especially poorly funded. It did not have much funding. Learning a lesson from the hotline, we began to create a legal support center. When I applied for the project, I wanted to make it a 2 to 3 year project with at least 200,000 to 300,000 yuan in the budget each year. So this project is well funded. This is the problem caused by the uneven internal allocation of resources at that time. At this time, I came upon an opportunity. It was in 1999 when I went to Britain to participate in the Chinese Women Organizing Seminar. At that time,
this seminar was held at Oxford University.
Right. We had a main theme for discussion at this seminar. Are the resources for NGOs in Beijing and outside areas in China at the same level? Among large NGOs, not all women's organizations were feminist organizations. For example, there were some religious women's organizations, right? When we talked about the power relations between these groups for the first time, I became to realize that the types of philosophy, concepts, and principles that we use to run an organization are also very important. The critical spirit of feminism and its subversiveness should also be manifested in the construction of a feminist organization. A feminist organization should challenge the hierarchical structure and elitism of masculinist organizational culture. There was another discussion at the seminar about an interesting phenomenon. It made me reconsider some things. We talked about what had occurred in Henan in the mid-80s. They were very active, but in the 1990s, totally collapsed.
Right, it totally collapsed.
This was not a natural phenomenon. Therefore, I wanted us to think about how the organization could bring a group of people together so that we could accomplish things instead of relying only on one person. If this one person failed, the whole organization would fall apart. We needed to learn a lesson from this. Therefore, after I came back in 1999, our organization started to work on how to transform our structure so that it would promote more participation, be more democratic, and more sustainable. During this time, Shu gave me a suggestion that we should perform an appraisal of the past few years of our project. Then we could again formulate our future strategic plan. So I gave, at that time, the project officer from the Oxfam Hong Kong really had a lot of experience. He also gave me very good suggestions. In 2000, with financial support from the Oxfam Hong Kong, we hired a coordinator who assisted us in formulating the organization's 5-year strategic development plan. This process took about 6 months, in which we had approximately more than 40 meetings. This process was extremely tedious, but it was also extremely helpful.
Who did the Oxfam Hong Kong hire to help you?
They invited, who was that? Zhou Yanzhu.
Where was she from?
She was from Hong Kong. She had a lot of experience with development organizations and non-governmental organizations.
Then she came and worked with each of your departments.
She was a coordinator.
All of your departments participated?
Yes, the departments worked on their own but also collaborated. At first we had a training session on how to do planning. We discussed the external environment first. Then we discussed the strong and weak points within our organization as well as the opportunities and challenges that we are facing. Then we looked at what these departments should aim to do and could do for the next 5 years. I really felt this whole process was very good. This forced everyone to seriously consider what sort of organization the Research Association should be. What kind of relationship should each small group have within the Research Association? What type of organizational mechanism should we have? Finally, we all came together to determine our strategic goals for the next 5 years. 5 of them are related to the guiding principles and directions for our service. The 6 concerned our organization, that is, to improve the internal management mechanisms and explore ways to create a women's organization with a participatory, democratic, and sustainable model. This plan for the development of our research association, in retrospect, was actually, I think this field consists of mainly 3 circles. At first, we completely emphasized women's studies. For example, we participated in Du Fangqin's 1993 conference and the 1997 Nanjing conference. Basically, there was a conference we always sent people to go. We wanted to be able to bring our own voices and present our own research results. So at that stage, our focus was mainly in the area of research. From 1996, we started to carry out some projects. Especially after we carried out rural development projects, we entered into the development area. I think in the development area and providing services, our organization was different from the majority of organizations. Most people in our organizations were scholars who had the ability to do research. We carried out our research. In terms of methodology, we called our research action research. I learned it from feminist methodologies. Before we do a project, we design a theoretical framework. Our projects aim to have some kind of intervention. During the process, we continue to evaluate our projects and make necessary adjustments. Finally, in the end, we have to evaluate the achievements of our work. This then further enriches our theory. This is where our Shaanxi Research Association is different from some pure development organizations. When we engage in countryside development projects, we pay special attention to the question of gender and development. There is the issue of how to localize theories. We have made a lot of explorations and we have written a series of articles about this. In this area, we promote the mainstreaming of gender. We have also provided gender awareness trainings for many organizations and international agencies. We don't have the statistics, I'm not sure, but the other day they roughly counted and found that in the past several years we have given more than 200 gender training workshops. Gender trainings, gender and development, these kind of trainings. We have done a lot of facilitation work.
In Shaanxi province?
In Shaanxi province and in other provinces.
Other provinces?
We held trainings with international agencies. We have gone to Lanzhou, Inner Mongolia. Actually, I just came back from Inner Mongolia. We have been to Sichuan, Hefei, Guangzhou, and Beijing. We have really had a lot of trainings. This work is in the development field. In terms of within our own organization, we all talk about, well, very early within development domain, we discussed the issue of mainstreaming gender. But how would we mainstream it? I think there are a lot of organizations that only pay attention to labels. They only care if your project design pays attention to women. They only require we include this kind of content in the project proposal. But how do we integrate gender in our projects so that during the process of the project we can pay attention to women's strategic gender interests instead of short-term interests? How do you really achieve empowerment? We have to keep exploring and practice. Our own project sites, such as Danfeng and Ningxian, have created some good models for development organizations to study and observe. So in the development domain in the country, in terms of gender and development, our organization can be considered quite successful and thus well known. This can be seen as our contribution to the field. In the development domain, I think the issue of power relations is emphasized. That is to say, this field emphasizes participation, emphasizing that all related interest groups should participate in the process of project design. It has trained us both in terms of approach and concepts. Therefore, within our own organization, all the significant matters are openly discussed. Everyone participates through discussions. As soon as we establish how to proceed, everyone works together to implement the plan. We are slightly ahead of the times in our management style of an NGO within China. When do we start to move from development circles to non-governmental organization circles? That was in 2002 or 2003. At first, we only paid attention to internally constructing our organizations. We only hoped this organization could continue to operate successfully. In 2003, with the onslaught of SARS, April 20th was probably the turning point of the crisis. The health ministry publicly talked about the pandemic. At the time, we were doing a project in Shenyang. We realized we could not get around in town. We postponed a lot of our trainings. So we thought we could write some articles. We had been asked to write about our work. Eventually, when we returned to Xi'an, SARS also appeared there. The media kept reporting the panic. Here salt was sold out and there masks were sold out. We realized that SARS had transformed from a public health crisis to... We felt that if it was not handled well, it could become a social crisis. In this time, as an NGO, how could we serve as a bridge between citizens and the government, mobilizing the people to work together with the government to deal with this difficult situation? We spent 5 days, an entire 5 days, to formulate our plans. We planned, designed, and found funding for a set of 3 big posters and posted them everywhere in all communities in Xi'an. These posters had a huge impact and were very beneficial. The media said that we handled a matter that the government should have been responsible for. I feel that during the crisis as an NGO, a feminist NGO, I think that society was able to see the strength of NGOs and the role of NGOs could play in society.
和政府一起共度这个难关。所以我们采用了，我们自己25号在一块商量，我们花了5天，整整只有5天的时间，我们从策划到设计到造资源，我们印了一套就是3张一套大宣传画，3万张宣传画就已经走进西安市的大小社区了。那一场影响非常好，影响也非常大。媒体来说呀，你们做的政府想，本来应该政府做的事你们做了。然后这场出去后呢，我觉得就是说，作为一个 NGO， 尤其作为一个女性主义 NGO 的，就在这整个一个公共危机中间发生了。我觉得咱社会看到了这个 NGO 的力量，也看到了 NGO 在社会上扮演的角色。
After this incident, we realized in our experiences that we have the responsibility to promote a mature civil society in China. As civil society in China matures, we wait for the legal system and the legal environment to continue to improve. How will it improve? We cannot sit back and wait for the government to do it for us. In the same way that the women's movement promotes gender equality on our own, we have to take the initiative to handle matters. Only after you have taken the initiative can you encourage others also to get involved. So we should work on building our capacities within NGOs, and we should facilitate the building of grassroots NGOs. At the same time, we also move towards creating networks among NGOs. For example, in 2000 in Xi'an, we initiated and created the Chinese Gender and Development Network. We have also organized a Shaanxi NGO network, a study network. Now we are preparing an NGO network in the northwestern region. We are currently discussing our second 5-year plan. We hope to play a more important role in the northwestern NGO network. We also participate in a network with Beijing.
然后我们现在正在筹划着跟西北地区 NGO 网络，我们也希望正在讨论我们未来的第2个5年规划中间，我们希望在西北 NGO 网络中间扮演更重要的角色。那么我们还在跟北京还有一个网络。
We should continue to talk, but we need to change the tape.
Oh, I'm talking too much.
No, you're not. Let's change the tape. Now, how many people are involved with the Research Association?
The Research Association currently has 19 or 20 full-time staff and about 120 members.
So a full-time staff of about 19 and more than 100 members.
We also have some people who hold jobs at other places and also work for us.
So more than 100 members. Are they from everywhere or mainly from Shaanxi province?
We also have some volunteers. Maybe there are more than 100 volunteers. Some volunteers are also members. Only after volunteering for more than 2 years can volunteers apply to become a member. Therefore, more than half of our volunteers are not members.
Do members have to pay membership dues?
Yes, they pay membership dues.
How much does it cost?
It costs 50 yuan per year.
You just mentioned a moment ago that in the Northwest, you wanted to develop a local network. Was it because Shaanxi already had this network?
Yes, the network has already been established in Shaanxi.
So then you want to focus on the Northwest area. How did you plan to establish this in the area?
In comparison, the NGOs in Gansu, Xinjiang, and Ningxia were still rather small and rather weak. Recently, we were in the process of working with Lanzhou University's Center for Research on Sustainable Development. We applied for a project to build capacities of NGOs in the Northwest area. This is a 2-year project. By providing a series of training, we hope to provide these NGOs with some channels to build their capacities. Of course, this does not involve only trainings. They can also come to our organization to get practical experience. Some of the university students volunteered for us. We train them to have a better understanding about how NGOs work in China and gain experience. Then after they graduate, they may choose to work in an NGO as a career.
You have open positions to university students from around the country.
We look at their abilities. For 2 years, we have already attempted to establish a program where we have university students do internships. This year, they also applied to be volunteers. Our workplace has limited space. Now we are working jointly with several other NGOs. Together, we are looking at how to establish a base for university student interns. The amount of students we can take in is now limited.
Are you receiving interns from all over the country?
No, just Xi'an. We receive students from Northwest University and Shaanxi Normal University. They come as interns. This year we accepted someone from another province. She stayed here for 2 months. She was from Hefei as a volunteer. So this is an idea. Another idea is a lot of new NGOs have not officially registered, nor do they have accountants. They do not have much experience in managing funds. So we are thinking about providing some grassroots NGOs with a financial consultation. If they request it, we may also help them with managing finances. Currently, our organization has a very good reputation among NGOs because we manage our finances very well. Our accountants are very experienced. These are some of the things we will carry out.
Because you have done a lot of different kinds of work in this area, you might not be able to discuss all of them in the short time we have for this interview. There's one thing in particular. I know that among your many projects, one has lasted a long time. That is the Red Phoenix Project. Could you speak a bit about the project?
The Red Phoenix Project was a product of the 1995 World Conference on Women. In August of 1994, I had just come back from Australia. The Shaanxi Province Women's Federation convened a conference for Women's Federation presidents from 10 regions and cities in order to discuss how to welcome the 1995 World Conference on Women. At that time, many different ideas were brought up, but none of these ideas encouraged wide participation. They would only involve a small number of people. The 1995 World Women's Conference was to be convened in Beijing. I thought that such a grand meeting should be able to mobilize all women, especially women who had previously been marginalized. We should encourage them to participate. Shaanxi is a big agricultural province. Rural women occupy a large proportion of the population. How could we facilitate the participation of rural women? All of a sudden I thought, I had been carrying out rural development projects for a long time and was very familiar with rural women. The Shaanxi folk culture history is long and glorious. Rural women are very skilled and talented in numerous ways. For example, they make paper cutouts and embroidery. When I made the Shaanxi women's picture album, I collected from everywhere a lot of... At the time, I contacted some folk artists. I knew they were really amazing. Therefore, I thought about whether I could use their embroidery to create a large quilt. In Shaanxi women's history, there was a tradition of making embroidered quilts that was given to temples. They are called 100-flower tents. So I asked, could we organize these women to embroider a large quilt? I was not sure exactly how big it should be. I quickly borrowed a calculator to make some calculations. If they made 5-inch by 5-inch square patches, then a 4-meter by 7-meter quilt would need to have 1,008 patches. We could call it the 1,000-flower tent. I spoke to our Women's Federation president about my idea. I asked her if we could mobilize women in the entire province to make this. The president thought this idea was really very novel and she supported me. So I started to look for people to design and plan this project. The whole process really was extremely interesting. We started from the design to buying the cloths to cutting out the pieces and so on, until in the end when the embroidered quilt was finally finished. The embroidered quilt used more than a dozen different colors of cloth to make the base. Then they put together the image of a soaring red phoenix with its wings spread. It symbolized the Chinese women's movement. Also, it symbolized the spirit of Chinese women. At first, I had wanted to donate it to the UN because I had seen many gifts that had been presented to the United Nations. Before the quilt was completed, I saw published in the paper the success of the auction of the red lanterns that used to hang at Tiananmen. These were sold for several million yuan. I thought when this 1,000-flower tent was completed, it would without a doubt be an absolute treasure. Think about it. Over 1,000 rural women worked together to produce this traditional embroidered quilt. How remarkable! It would have an incredible amount of artistic value. In addition, it was created in the atmosphere of holding the World Women's Conference. I thought, could we sell it and make some money to do some projects for women? Prior to this, we had always applied for funding from overseas foundations. We always used others' money. When would China also have its own foundation? I look forward to the time when we would have our own foundation. If we could sell it for a good price, we could establish a foundation. Then we could use its funds to do things, so we wanted each embroidered square to be a high-quality piece of work. Actually, we made it twice. The first time, at the time, I went out of town on a business trip for a Women's Federation conference, so the assistant director supervised the work. She didn't explain the idea clearly to the lower-level Women's Federation officials. So these people thought they were supposed to embroider some famous labor model images. They turned in the work. This work can show women's participation, but it doesn't have much artistic value. The colors were not right either. So I told them we could not use it. I took some people with me to a lot of fabric factories to look for cloth. Initially, I thought cotton would be ideal, but we could not find cotton fabrics in many colors, so we settled with silk. Silk is too soft. We then contacted a factory having them make liners for the patches. We had to make the patches to sell to small shops and have them perfect the patches. Then we sent for one official from each of the 10 regions and took them to the Museum of Folk Art. We showed them the designs and asked them to find old women who knew how to make traditional embroidery. These old women could embroider what they liked the most and give us their best product. So this was the second time. When the patches were put together, it was beautiful. Later, we invited some experts to look at it. Experts of folk art saw it. It was very difficult to accomplish. Each step was hard. It was so big. Did you know how we put together the patches? More than 1,000 pieces of them? One of us was reading the design, telling us where to put patches of different colors. Other people carried the big piles of cloth grouped in different colors. We cleaned the floor. We knelt on the floor to make it. The designer stood higher to check if the patches were put together correctly. When we put the patches together, we had to number them. We made 1 square meter first, and then another. Finally, to sew them together, we had to take them to a factory. I told them this was made for the World Women's Conference. They did not charge us. It was difficult work to piece them together nicely. 1 whole year from designing to the end.
要那传统的民间的图案。至于什么图案，然后他们就把他们每个人最想的、就是最棒的、最拿手的那个图案绣出来就行了。所以等于第二次组织了一遍，真的绣出来的非常的好。那么后来我们开专家那个评审会的时候，民俗专家在里面看到了，就是把那个做好，非常那个啥的，不容易做好。那每个环节其实都非常的艰辛。那么大，你知道我们拼图的时候怎么拼的吗？1000多张啊，我们就一个人念着的图，绿的、红的、蓝的，另外人抱一大朵绿的、红的、蓝的，就这样摆在一个很大的地上，把它地擦干净。我们就跑到跪到那儿，然后跟那个设计者站得很高的地方再看那个好不好。合的时候。要厚度都得编号，这是第几排第几座，得1米1米的合在一块儿，1米1米的收到一块儿，缝完了后1米1米才能对在一块儿，然后没人能帮我们把它组合起来，又跑到一个锦江刺绣厂去，让人家那工人们说临界师傅会的义务帮我们做呢，才帮那个有一点一点的。因为弄不好不平嘛，
对，
整整花了1年的时间，从开始设计到最后花了1年。
经费呢
Where did the funds come from?
We garnered some support.
Oh, with support from society?
We asked companies to donate some money. There was one company that wanted us to hang up their name on the quilt, but we would not want to do this. This company agreed to support, but they wanted to hang up their name. I said, this is a gift from women of the whole province to welcome World Women's Conference. We can't hang up your name, it is odd. So we contacted the assistant deputy governor of the province, a woman governor. We told her about the project. She was moved by our project. She said, I will put you into contact with a company. They won't ask for hanging up the company name. She found a company for us. She also told the finance department to give us more than 100,000 yen. The factories did not ask us to pay. In this way, it was accomplished. By the time Beijing held the World Conference on Women, we still had not sold it in an auction, so we displayed it there. People could see it. It left a really good impression on people. After we came back, we took it to an auction house. They did not have a lot of experience the first time it was not sold. However, it was the news that this work that was not successfully auctioned that attracted a lot of attention. People were asking a propitious number for a cell phone or a good license plate number for a car could sell for several hundreds of thousands yen. This was a treasure with immeasurable artistic value because so many women had worked on it. It was truly a treasure. There would not be another one like this. These women who made the embroideries were in their 70s or 80s. When they pass away, young generations didn't know how to make this kind of embroidery. There would not be another piece of work like this. Why didn't someone who was affluent have the eye to buy it? Finally, the news of the failure to auction it came out. It was the second day after the news came out that some people came to buy it. They knew the base price, so they brought it according to the base price.
How much did they sell for?
350,000 yuan. The auction house fee was 10%, so we made 315,000 yuan. After the World Conference on Women, I took a leave and returned to Linping. This was the place where I worked as a sent-down youth. I came across an incident. In the neighboring village, a young woman who had been admitted to a university, but she did not attend because her family did not have enough money to send her. Her mother told her, you cannot attend university this year, but next year we will sell apples, and then you can go. I thought, this county is not too far from Xi'an, but there are girls whose family are too poor to send them to college. I passed on a message to that young woman. I told her that she should contact me. Then I went to talk to a Women's Federation cadre from the town. Can you go to that village and pass my words to that girl? Tell her to come to Xi'an and contact me. I will help her. This incident inspired me to take on the Red Phoenix project. At that time, our educational system was under transformation. They had just started to collect tuition. The school expenses were not that much at the time, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 yuan, but this still prevented some girls from attending college. I thought if the costs were too formidable for the kids to attend university, then some of them would give up their hopes of attending school. So I thought that maybe this money could be used to support education. The money from the Red Phoenix embroidered quilt was used to create a project with the name the Red Phoenix Project. I thought this name also had something to do with Chinese culture. In our culture, people always say, hope that a son will grow up to be a dragon and a daughter will grow to be a phoenix. The name of Red Phoenix indicates the nature of the project is to help young women become successful. This is how the project was started. At that time, the interest rate for deposits was quite high. I remember it was about 10% or 15%. In a year, we made almost 30,000 or 40,000 yuan in interest. This would allow us to support 10 students. Each of them would be given 1,000 yuan per year. 4 years in college would cost 4,000 yuan. During the first year, we sought to make it big in scale, so we supported 20 students. The message was passed on to many regions and towns. We required that the applicants must come from poor families. That means the family has to be in a rural area and its income is below the poverty line in China. To our surprise, we had more than 150 applications. We looked at the applications. The experience of each of them in their efforts to seek education was extremely difficult. Finishing high school really was not a very easy task for them. Now they wanted to attend university, and they just did not have the means to do so. So what would we do? I told the president that we should hold a press conference and see if the media could help us out. The result was that as soon as the media broadcast the situation, people began to call us and donate money. And the reporters helped us to look for companies that would also donate. The first year we supported more than 80 students. It was a success.
Businesses were making contributions.
Yes, companies began to do this. There were 4 companies that the reporters had put us in contact with which donated money. Each of these 4 companies supported 10 students. Then there were also small donations from society. Altogether, this allowed us to help more than 80 students. The first year was the most difficult, but we managed to send these students to college. This inspired me. We did so much in the first year. Then people would know about it in the second year. We had to carry this on little by little, but this process was really hard.
The first year of this project was in 1996.
In 1996, we helped more than 80 students. I remember there were 84 students, or maybe 85. The second year, we supported more than 60 students. Each year, we had to rely on the media coverage. And this operation was, this is expensive, so I thought how we should publicize this. Each year we tried to think of different ways of attracting funding. The first year we targeted the media. The second year we sent a letter to many companies. We found the list of all companies of medium and large scale in Xi'an and sent a letter to them. The third year we set up a web page. In this way we publicized it every year. But gradually we discovered that when these girls came from the countryside and went to the city, they were not only short of money, they also faced a lot of pressure because they were poor. Their self-esteem was impacted by poverty because
the disparity between urban and rural areas?
Yes, this disparity made them, for many of the students, this was quite psychologically stressful. There could be some unhealthy emotions that caused them to, compared to the city students, they never completely felt at ease to enjoy university life in the same way. Therefore, I thought that this project had to do something more. So, we started to look for funding in order to hold gender trainings and raise their gender consciousness. I hope that through raising their gender consciousness, that these young women would come to realize that being impoverished was not an individual's problem. Instead, it is a cultural and systematic problem. We also hope that they would return to their hometowns and make contributions there. Moreover, I also hope that the Red Phoenix Project could transmit compassion and raise society's sense of responsibility. I hope that after these young women graduated and were employed for 5 years, that they could then themselves subsidize the university student. During this process, I could see them grow and mature. In 2000, we held a farewell party, the Red Phoenix of the new century take off for the first class of graduates. The students organized this by themselves. They chose a group responsible for the preparations, and they arranged the program themselves. They hosted the party themselves. They only invited a male student to co-host. At that time, when I saw their program, Ning Hui Xia, and I could not stop my tears. We saw them growing up, and we knew them so well. We remember when their fathers and mothers brought them to our office. They did not have very much self-confidence, and they would often shrink behind their parents. But in 2000, they performed a modern dance and developed their own modern drama. They hosted their party. I really felt that they had grown and matured. So this process was really... Oh, we also helped them create a newsletter. They could publish their own writings there. The Red Phoenix Project has also always been managed quite strictly. The selection process for the students was also extremely competitive. Throughout this project, we have not had any scandals. Our reputation continues to grow better and better. Therefore, our influence has gradually spread. Even the central TV station reported on this. The influence has been widely spread. Now we have some people who regularly contribute money, including my personal friends, such as Dorothy Koh and Gail Hirschhatter.
是由他们自己组织的一个选的几个大学的人选着办的一个筹备小组，他们自己排节目，他们当主持人，只有一个男主持人从大学里面借来的，他们自己当主持人，他们自己演节目，筹办那个舞台的时候，哎呀，看到他们演节目，我和那个小明啊，我们俩眼泪就不断，知道吧？真的是不断，因为我们都看第一批我们太熟悉了，看他爸爸妈妈带他们。爸爸带我们到我们办公室的那份不自信，那份那个萎缩坐在那儿，那个情况，到了那个2000年是他们自己跳的现代舞，他们自己演节目、演话剧啊，当主持人，真是感觉他们那种成长。所以在那个过程中真是很动，也是帮他们，因为我们还办的有那个简报，他们自己也可以写点东西。 那么胡梦因为一直坚持的管理的也比较严格，另外呢，这个对学生的选择也非常严格，所以中间从来没有出现过任何的丑闻，信誉越来越好，所以它这个影响面呢，中央台也来做节目，它就慢慢的影响出去了，有一批稳定的资助人了，包括很多朋友。
Now the project has been transferred to the Women's Federation.
In 2004, I left my position as the Research Association director. Therefore, I have passed on the Red Phoenix project to the next director. Her name is Ban Li. She used to work in publicity department. She has strengths in publicity. Moreover, when I was doing the Red Phoenix project, I was not able to devote all of my energy. Our organization could not spend too much on it. Besides, I had to lead the association. Ban Li came. She may have two better strategies in terms of publicity. I think she has been quite successful. First, she mobilized all kinds of media forces. In addition, she combined the Red Phoenix project and the Women's Federation work in a much better way. When I was in charge of it, we were independent. We did not use Women's Federation resources. Why? Because I had always hoped that we can enlarge it into a women's foundation outside of the government. This was my dream. I hoped that this foundation, once it was created, would not have too many ties with the Women's Federation, because there could be some administrative intervention to impede its independence. Therefore, I kept its independent status, and I hope to operate it as a non-governmental foundation. However, without financial support from the Women's Federation, we had a lot of difficulties, right? Ban Li has inherited the success of our early work and a good foundation. Moreover, she has done a good job in publicity. In addition, the president of the Women's Federation is using their resources to carry on this project, so nowadays they support more students.
You have talked quite specifically about some aspects of your NGO. Could you talk more broadly about NGOs, not necessarily only your organization? Could you say something about how you see the future of women's NGOs in China? And also, what sort of relationship do women's NGOs have with the Women's Federation?
I will talk about this in two parts. Women's NGOs from the 1995 World Conference on Women onward have grown quite early in Chinese NGO circles. Also, I should say that their development has been quite good, but it is not the most successful. It does not compare to environmental protection NGOs. After the environmental protection NGOs started, they developed rather quickly. In the past several years, they have put forth a joint effort in promoting environmental protection initiatives to the government. They have done a better job than women's NGOs.
Why do you think this is the case?
I have not analyzed this in depth. Perhaps this would be a question worth researching. Environmental protection NGOs have done some great work in terms of initiating actions.
It has entered the mainstream media.
Yes, they have some people working in the media, but it was more than that. For instance, there was the situation with the New Jiang Dam. There was something that many NGOs worked on together. There were a group of very influential scientists that worked in these groups. I don't know, I've never analyzed this, but this is the situation. Currently, women's NGOs are divided into several different types. The one kind is the one that you are familiar with. Usually there are universities doing academic research, right? Research institutions are not necessarily counted as NGOs. A true NGO must be independent and publicly registered as an NGO. A university research center is more an agency that falls under the university structure. It has its own organizational model in terms of funding and personnel. In terms of grassroots women's NGOs, I don't think there are many new ones. This is a problem which they currently face, unlike environmental and development NGOs, which have a lot of new research, a lot of new government, which have a lot of new grassroots organizations. Most of China's women's NGOs are all from the 1990s. They came about because of the 1995 World Conference on Women. These past several years, there have not been many new NGOs. This is something that I'm rather worried about.
Right, we have noticed this problem too.
研究的组织严格上不可以在大学下的 NGO 不一定叫，它可以称不上 NGO，因为真正的 NGO 它是要求你独立性，你在社会公开注册的，你知道吗？那么大学的中心还更像一个大学底下的一个研究的一个派出机构一样的东西，它的经费人员它是另外一套的组织。那么这个草根的或者这种妇女 NGO 组织吧，我觉得呢，这些年新生的不多，这是他面临的问题。不像其他的环境呀和发展的 NGO 呀，我觉得那种草根的越来越多。中国的妇女 NGO 差不多都是90年代、95、10岁前后，这些年新生的不多，这是我感到比较担忧的一点。
For instance, at the 95+10 meeting, when you look at the participants, basically most of the people have been around for a long time. They're all influential figures.
There is a group of some new people. It is possible that there is a problem with the mechanisms. It was difficult for new people to participate in that conference. In China, in the past 2 or 3 years, there has been a tendency of rapid growth and development of NGOs in general. There are 2 new phenomena. I think there are many new ones, small ones, which have appeared. I went to Gansu province. I've been to Guangdong to help with the capacity building of NGOs in the southeast. I have participated in meetings organized by NGOs in the mainstream institutions. I've seen a lot of small ones.
Women's NGOs?
No, I mean NGOs in general. There are a lot of them. I'm talking about the tendency for NGOs in China.
Which kind of NGOs? Those that deal with environmental protection?
Environmental protection, development, and disabled people.
Oh, disabled people.
We should call them mentally challenged people, not disabled anymore. There are organizations that help mentally challenged people and children, social welfare, and senior citizens. Many kinds of them. This is my impression. I feel that the NGOs in China are developing pretty well. This is one point. The other is that I feel that we have just begun to talk more about NGOs' internal management and capacity building, such as management mechanisms, training the leaders, fundraising, financial management, etc. These years, many facilitating agencies for NGOs have appeared. For example, in Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou.
现在呢，更多的谈到 NGO 内部的管理和能力建设。如果刚开始 NGO 是一拨人自发组织起来，就是7、8条枪杆一合组起来就这么大。现在在 NGO 的能力建设方面，NGO 系统的内部的治理、领导力的培训、筹款、财务管理这一套的培训，也就出现了很多做 NGO 能力建设的中介机构。上海的庄爱玲，北京的 NPO，李来来，广州的朱建刚。
Are these being done by Chinese agencies?
Yes, our own NGOs. Their mission is to build up NGO capacities in a good NGO system.
Overseas foundations do not do this kind of work?
No, but their funding often comes from applications to overseas foundations, but the people are...
They're working on building the NGO's abilities and skills.
Right, they have established some organizations of this kind. There are a lot of seminars that deal with NGOs, so there are a lot of conferences on the issue of NGO networking. In the past, my emails basically all were related to the projects of the Research Association and to our own activities. This year I discovered that I've received a lot more emails from overseas NGOs. I have to participate in various networks. For example, now 7 organizations are initiating, we are one of them, a dialogue with the government. This is taking place in Beijing. This is meant to be a networking that focuses on the relationship between the government and NGOs. Not long ago, we held the first conference in Nanjing. Then, each of these 7 organizations will take turns preparing for and organizing conferences and seminars.
A national network? An NGO network?
Yes, a national network.
This is not only the women's network.
No, it is not a women's NGO network. As for women's NGOs, we have a project called 6 Organizations Building Women's NGO Capacities.
Did they meet in Beijing?
Yes, they met in Beijing. Very soon this year, they will hold the 2nd meeting in Henan. This is something that we are coordinating. With international organizations, we organize a Shaanxi NGO study network. In addition to all of this, many different places have asked us to provide trainings in the building of NGO capacities. Therefore, I think that NGOs are very active. In comparison, women's NGOs are relatively weak. They have not seemed to catch up with this
tendency for development.
Yes, they cannot seem to catch up with the NGO development tendency. The same situation exists as it did in the end of the 90s. I do not know the reason for this. I also have not given it much thought.
Then how do you see the future for yourself, apart from carrying out a lot of work for the Research Association's local network development, which you talked about a moment ago? What plans do you have for yourself?
I've been looking for opportunities. I want to pull back in the Research Association from the leadership position because I still want to do some research. I criticize myself for this, but I think my attachment to research still exists. I would especially like to do some research on women's history, the 1950s. I've collected a lot of materials for this historical period. After the 1980s, I personally experienced much of what was going on. I myself participated in the whole development of women's studies, development projects in rural areas, and the development of NGOs. I wanted to think about these experiences as a historical subject and do some research. I have many dreams about the research that I could do. Currently, the only problem is that I do not have any time to do it. Perhaps after I retire from some of my positions, then... Honestly, I can't say when I can retire from these positions, but I'm preparing for it.
NGO 的发展这个圈子，我都有很多的自己的那个亲历。另外，我也想把这些东西的经历也本身作为一个对象去思考它去，也想做点研究，就是有很多这种研究的梦。目前只是说没时间，看看能不能等逐渐的退下来吧。我 这话老说，我也现在不敢给别人说我什么时候能退下来了，但我还是在做退的准备。
If you pull back from many of your current responsibilities, do you think the Research Association will operate the same as when you're an active part of it?
Now the Research Association has a set of internal mechanisms that are already established. I think even if I am not around, they will still do a great job. In the Research Association, I know I play a kind of psychologically stabilizing role. Temporarily, there is not another person who can replace me, so I cannot give up all of my responsibilities at once. I have once told people that I regard the establishment of the Shaanxi Women's Research Association as one kind of research, one kind of innovation. It is the case in the whole process of political democratization in China. Through its growth, we have experienced all kinds of opportunities, challenges, and obstacles and our own agency. This, in and of itself, can be considered a research paper that I am writing in practice. I hope that I am able to write it well. Since we already achieved so much, I hope that we can successfully accomplish it. If this was purely individual interest, now I work too hard. My daughter criticizes me and says that I overlook my health. My workload is so heavy, is too heavy. So if it were purely individual interest, I might have already given up. But I think this article is still not finished. I am still not at the point of where I am near completion of this paper. This is how I think about it.